Hello friends, in our UPSC MAINS GS2 series, today we will cover the topic of poverty. Now poverty is a very important topic both for your GS1 and your GS2 paper, as every year 2 to 3 questions are asked on the topic of poverty. Now since it's a long topic, we will be covering it in a series of 3 lectures. So first let me go over the topics that will be covered in lecture 1. So the first lecture we'll start by looking at the topics that I'll be covering. Let's take a look. First we will understand the definition of poverty. Then we will understand the concept of purchasing power parity. Now the concept of PPP or purchasing power parity is important for you to understand in order to understand the World Bank's definition of poverty. Okay. We will also look at the criteria of poverty estimation, that is the income-based criteria, the consumption-based criteria and the multidimensional criteria. We will be looking at the various commissions appointed by Government of India in order to estimate poverty in our country. We will finally look at Niti Aayog's multidimensional poverty index report, and also we will see how it is linked to the United Nations multidimensional poverty index. Before going into a detailed discussion of poverty, we first need to understand its definition. How is poverty defined? So, poverty is understood to mean the lack of basic amenities of life like food, shelter, clothing, etc. that are essential for your survival and dignity. Now, this is the World Bank's definition of poverty. It not only leads to hunger and malnourishment, but also affects opportunities for education, occupation, living, and empowered political participation. Now, the World Bank in September 2022 updated their earlier absolute poverty line of $1.90 per capita per day to an income of less than $2.15 per capita per day in terms of 2017 purchasing power parity. Now what does this mean? इसका ये मतलब है कि पहले वर्ल्ड बैंक ने डिफाइन किया था एब्सोल्यूट पॉवर्टी यानी कि चरम गरीबी को at an income level of $1.90 per day. Then they revised this criteria to $2.15 in 2022 यानी कि कोई इंसान जो दिन के $2.15 से कम कमा रहा है, according to the World Bank, that person is in extreme poverty. But however, in this definition you see that there is a concept which a lot of you may not be familiar with. That is the concept of PPP. इसका क्या मतलब होता है? Purchasing power parity in terms of 2017 purchasing power parity. So first let's look at the definition of purchasing power parity. PPP, purchasing power parity, is a measure of the relative value of currencies that compares the prices purchasing a fixed basket of goods and services in different countries. यानी कि अगर आप दो अलग अलग देशों में जाएं और एक fixed basket of goods and services खरीदें, तो आप कितने पैसे खर्चेंगे एक country में compared to how much you will spend in the other country. PPP effectively is the ratio of the price of a basket of goods in one location divided by the price of the same basket of goods in another location. Now it is a technical concept of microeconomics. You don't need to go very much in detail, but just so that you understand the concept, I have taken up a very basic example. A small hypothetical basket we have taken here. This basket contains 1 kg or 1 liter of milk and 1 kg of sugar. Now in Delhi city, okay, the price of 1 liter of milk is rupees 66. ठीक है, दिल्ली में 1 लीटर दूध का दाम है 66 rupees और 1 किलो चीनी का दाम है approximately 50 रुपए. So the total, if you buy 1 liter of milk and 1 kg of sugar in Delhi, you will be spending rupees 116 approximately on these. Okay, 2 articles. The same basket of goods, if you go to New York City, you find that the price of 1 liter of milk in New York City is in American dollars $1.32. When we use the currency conversion metric, we take about 83 rupees per dollar as the conversion rate, and we find that the price of the milk there is rupees 110 rounded off for 1 liter of milk. So you are paying much more than what you pay in New Delhi for 1 liter of milk in New York City. The price of 1 kg of sugar is approximately the same. it is fixed 56 cents, which comes to around 46 rupees. So the total is 156 rupees 62 paisa. When you look at the purchasing power parity, we see that we can purchase more in New Delhi for the same amount of money in US dollars than we can buy in New York City. The currency conversion rate of 83 rupees has to be adjusted against the rate of PPP, that is purchasing power parity. Fine, and we find that our country is not that poor. If you just look at the currency conversion rate and look at our GDP, you find that the GDP is actually much lower, but when you look at PPP also, then our GDP goes up much higher. This is what we will understand in the next slide. When we make comparisons between rich countries and developing countries, GDP based on PPP can dramatically increase the estimated size of the developing economies, usually by 2 to 4 times. For example, using the market exchange rate of 2019, the GDP of India in 2019 was estimated to be about $2.8 trillion, which is just 13% of the American GDP. However, if you factor in PPP into this estimate, India's GDP in 2019 was close to $9.5 trillion, roughly 44% of US GDP. यानी कि कहाँ 13% of US GDP और कहाँ 44%. ठीक है, जैसे ही हम परचेजिंग पावर पैरिटी को फैक्टर इन करते हैं, जीडीपी के एस्टिमेट में हमारा जीडीपी का साइज कई गुना बढ़ जाता है. ठीक है, सो ग्लोबली एस्टिमेट्स ऑफ जीडीपी बेस्ड ऑन market exchange rates indicated that in 2020, high income countries accounted for 63% of the world economy. अगर हम सिर्फ जीडीपी का मेट्रिक लें तो वी फाइंड दैट 2020 में जो हाई इनकम कंट्रीज हैं वो कहते थे कि वी कंट्रीब्यूट 63% टू द वर्ल्ड्स जीडीपी. However, as soon as we take purchasing power parity PPP into the mix, we find that the high income countries actually only contributed 52% of the world's GDP and the rest was contributed by low income and middle income countries. Now we go over the questions that have come in the last 10 years related to poverty. I cannot cover all questions, but I will be covering certain key questions. So the first question is, though there have been several different estimates of poverty in India, all indicating a reduction in the poverty over time, do you agree? Critically examine with reference to urban and rural poverty indicators. So let us first take this question, okay? And this question came in 2015, but it's a very comprehensive question. It covers most of the topic, a lot of the portion on poverty, okay? In order to tackle a question like this, first you need to understand certain basic concepts. So the first thing you need to understand is that in the measurement of poverty, 3 types of criteria are used. 3 प्रकार के मापदंड इस्तेमाल किए जाते हैं पॉवर्टी के एस्टिमेशन में. One is the income based criteria, the second is the consumption based criteria, and the third is the multidimensional criteria. Now the World Bank uses an income based criteria and defines poverty as an income of less than $2.50 per capita per day, adjusted to PPP of 2017. This definition we have done it before also. India, on the other hand, has never used a income-based criteria. इंडिया ने कभी भी आय पे आधारित क्राइटेरिया पॉवर्टी के एस्टिमेट में नहीं यूज किया है. पहले इंडिया कंजम्पशन बेस्ड यानी कि उपभोग या खपत बेस्ड क्राइटेरिया यूज करता था और उसके बाद 2015 में जब नीति आयोग बना तो फिर बहुआयामी यानी कि मल्टी डायमेंशनल क्राइटेरिया यूज होने लगा. वी नाउ लुक एट हाउ वी आंसर अ क्वेश्चन लाइक दिस. So in order to answer a question like this, first you have to clarify that India traditionally used a consumption based criteria, but later when Niti Aayog was formulated, it moved to using a multidimensional criteria. And we can give the reference of some of the earlier committees. You cannot go over every single committee that was formed since independence. You have to only give certain, major examples. The main committees that were formed, and this is important for your prelims also because these questions, this sort of, questions come in your prelims also. In 1979, the government adopted the YK Alag Committee recommendations to define poverty as a consumption of less than 2,400 calories per day in rural areas and 2,100 calories per day in urban areas. And this continued till 2009. इसका क्या मतलब है? सी YK अलग कमेटी की रिकमेंडेशंस गवर्नमेंट ने अडॉप्ट की थी 1979 में, एंड YK अलग कमेटी ने ये कहा था कि पुअर पर्सन वो है जिसको गांव या रूरल एरियाज में 2400 कैलोरीज भी खाने को नहीं मिलती, यानी कि उसको 2 टाइम भरपेट भोजन नहीं मिलता है। और अर्बन एरियाज में दिस वाज 2100 कैलोरीज। इस क्योंकि अर्बन एरियाज में मैनुअल काम कम होता है, श्रम कम करते हैं लोग, इसलिए अर्बन एरियाज का जो कैलोरी कंजम्पशन का क्राइटेरिया है थोड़ा सा रूरल एरियाज से नीचे रखा गया था। ठीक है, एंड बाय दिस एस्टिमेट इन द 1980s and 90s we find that more than 30% of Indians were below poverty line, यानी कि 30% से ज़्यादा लोगों को हमारी कंट्री में इतनी कैलोरीज नहीं मिल पाती थी कि वो भरपेट 2 टाइम का भोजन खा सकें। ठीक है, नाउ दिस क्राइटेरिया कंटिन्यूड टिल 2009. In 2009, the Tendulkar Commission was formulated. It was actually formulated in 2006, but it gave its recommendations in 2009, and its recommendations were then adopted. So the Tendulkar Committee, for the first time, now this question has already come in the prelims, that which committee for the first time used expenses on health and education etc. in the estimation of poverty. So the answer is the Tendulkar Commission. ठीक है, the Tendulkar Commission used a consumption based criteria and defined absolute poverty as an expenditure of less than rupees 32 in urban areas and less than rupees 26 in rural areas. The Tendulkar Committee for the first time included expenses on health, education, clothes, etc. in addition to the expenses on food for the first time in poverty estimates. And it set aside the calorie criteria which was being used earlier. As a result, the national poverty line for 2011-12 was estimated at rupees 816 per month for rural areas and rupees 1000 for urban areas. इसका ये मतलब है कि गांव के एरियाज में, रूरल एरियाज में अगर कोई 816 रुपए से कम कमा रहा है तो वो पुअर है पर मंथ, और अगर अर्बन एरियाज यानी कि शहरी इलाकों में अगर कोई 1000 रुपए से महीने में कम कमा रहा है पर मंथ तो वो पुअर है एज पर द गवर्नमेंट्स डेफिनेशन. Okay, now this continued till about 2014. The Rangraj Commission was appointed. The Rangraj Commission suggested some modifications in Tendulkar's report. It said that the rural and urban criteria should be made equal, and certain other recommendations it made. But Rangraj Commission is not very important because its recommendations were never adopted by the government of India. In 2015, we find that the Niti Aayog was constituted. And the Niti Aayog completely changed over from using the consumption based criteria. अब तक हमने 2 criteria देखे हैं, income based जो वर्ल्ड बैंक का है जो आय पे आधारित है, और consumption based जो खपत पे आधारित है जो गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया यूज कर रही थी. अब 2015 में ये दोनों क्राइटेरियाज को सेट असाइड किया, नीति आयोग ने इन दोनों क्राइटेरियाज को अलग हटाया और नीति आयोग ने एक मल्टी डायमेंशनल पॉवर्टी इंडेक्स डेवलप किया. नाउ मल्टी डायमेंशनल पॉवर्टी इंडेक्स में नीति आयोग ने 3 बेसिक क्राइटेरिया लिए, हेल्थ, एजुकेशन एंड स्टैंडर्ड ऑफ लिविंग. अब हेल्थ में उन्होंने 2 क्राइटेरिया लिए, दैट इज न्यूट्रिशन एंड चाइल्ड मोर्टेलिटी. एजुकेशन में भी 2 क्राइटेरिया लिए, ईयर्स ऑफ स्कूलिंग एंड स्कूल अटेंडेंस. एंड स्टैंडर्ड ऑफ लिविंग में इन्होंने कई सारे क्राइटेरिया लिए लाइक कुकिंग फ्यूल, सैनिटेशन, ड्रिंकिंग वाटर, हाउसिंग, इलेक्ट्रिसिटी, एसेट्स एंड बैंक अकाउंट. इन सब क्राइटेरियाज को इक्वल वेटेज दी गई, यानी कि हेल्थ 1/3, एजुकेशन 1/3 एंड स्टैंडर्ड ऑफ लिविंग को भी 1/3 वेटेज दिया गया. इनके जो सब क्राइटेरिया थे उनको भी सबको इक्वल वेटेज दी गई. और फिर नीति आयोग की फाइंडिंग्स ये थी कि नीति आयोग ने नेशनल फैमिली एंड हेल्थ सर्वे NFHS 5 जो कि 2019 से 21 में हुआ था, बिकॉज वी नेवर हैड अ सेंसस बिकॉज ऑफ कोविड, सो नीति आयोग कुड नॉट यूज द सेंसस डेटा, सो दे यूज द नेशनल फैमिली एंड हेल्थ सर्वे डेटा and they published the report in 2023, and the Niti Aayog found that India has registered a decline in poverty. मतलब कि poverty में गिरावट आई है, गरीबी में गिरावट आई है. The number of multidimensionally poor, that is बहुआयामी गरीब, has declined from 24.85% to 14.96%. In absolute terms, 13.5 crore Indians have escaped poverty in this time. Still, 1 out of 7 Indians continues to live in poverty. Now that we have understood Niti Aayog's multidimensional poverty index and their progress report on poverty, let us look at the question again. The examiner is asking you to be critical. The examiner is asking you, there have been several different estimates of poverty in India. All indicate a reduction in poverty over time. Do you agree? So the examiner is asking for your opinion. Now, in such a question, you are not supposed to give your opinion without presenting certain empirical facts and data or presenting a credible report. So here, in order to understand whether you agree or not, you need to present certain data or you need to present a report, that is the United Nations Human Development UN HDI report. Okay, we can say that Niti Aayog claims that India has seen a great reduction in poverty. However, this claim is contradicted by the UNDP's Human Development Index report. So you must substantiate your argument with credible sources. Okay, so we find that in UNDP's Human Development Index report of 2021-22, India ranked 132 out of 191 nations. India ranked behind Sri Lanka, Brazil and even Bangladesh. तो हम क्या देख रहे हैं? एग्जामिनर हमसे पूछ रहा है कि इंडियन गवर्नमेंट ने जितनी भी कमीशंस अपॉइंट की, सब ये कहते हैं कि यहाँ पे गरीबी घट रही है. डू यू अग्री? क्या आप इस बात से सहमत हैं? आप अगर इस बात से सहमत नहीं हैं तो आपको फिर कुछ ऐसी रिपोर्ट या कुछ ऐसे सोर्सेज साइट करने पड़ेंगे जो इस बात को कॉन्ट्रडिक्ट करते हैं और जो कि यूनिवर्सली एक्सेप्टेड हैं. तो हम यहाँ पे यूनाइटेड नेशंस की ह्यूमन डेवलपमेंट इंडेक्स रिपोर्ट लेते हैं और उसमें हम देखते हैं कि इंडिया रैंक्स 132 आउट ऑफ 191 countries, even behind countries like Bangladesh. And this report has used the criteria like life expectancy at birth, that is जीवन प्रत्याशा. जब एक बेबी पैदा होता है तो वो कितने महीने या कितने साल जिएगा, एक तो वो क्राइटेरिया यूज़ किया गया है. मीन ईयर्स ऑफ स्कूलिंग, यानी औसत नंबर ऑफ ईयर्स जो बच्चे स्कूल जाते हैं. एक्सपेक्टेड ईयर्स ऑफ स्कूलिंग, कितने साल वो स्कूल जाने की हम उम्मीद रखते हैं कि वो कितने साल स्कूल जाएंगे. एंड द ग्रॉस नेशनल इनकम GNI पर कैपिटा एट PPP. हम अगर देखें तो हमारी जो अर्थव्यवस्था है वो वर्ल्ड की 5th लार्जेस्ट, 5वीं सबसे बड़ी अर्थव्यवस्था है पर GDP के टर्म्स में. पर जब हम उसको GNI यानी कि ग्रॉस नेशनल इनकम, जब उस GDP को हमारी पॉपुलेशन में बांटा जाता है, पर हेड हम GDP देखते हैं जिसे GNI कहते हैं, तो हमारा औसतन GNI काफ़ी कम है और इसकी वजह से हमारा जो है देश काफ़ी पिछड़े देशों की गिनती में आता है. वी लुक एट अनदर क्वेश्चन. अब एक और क्वेश्चन देखते हैं जो UPSC में 2000 CSE में 2020 में आया है. 2020 मतलब काफ़ी रिसेंटली आया है, पिछले 3 साल में. सो द इंसिडेंस एंड इंटेंसिटी ऑफ पॉवर्टी आर मोर इम्पॉर्टेंट इन डिटर्मिनिंग पॉवर्टी दैन इनकम अलोन. इन दिस कॉन्टेक्स्ट एनालाइज द लेटेस्ट यूनाइटेड नेशंस मल्टी-डायमेंशनल पॉवर्टी इंडेक्स रिपोर्ट. अब ये एग्जामिनर आपसे पूछ रहा है कि इंसिडेंस एंड इंटेंसिटी ऑफ पॉवर्टी इज मोर इम्पॉर्टेंट दैन इनकम अलोन. सो आपने ये समझ लिया कि इनकम बेस्ड क्राइटेरिया है वो काफ़ी नहीं है, इसीलिए हमें मल्टी डायमेंशनल क्राइटेरिया की तरफ पूरा वर्ल्ड मूव कर रहा है. सो द एग्जामिनर एक्सपेक्ट्स यू टू नो दैट इनकम अलोन इज नॉट वेरी sufficient criteria for determining poverty. So first we look at the United Nations Multidimensional Poverty Index. We find that the dimensions which they have are actually similar to the Niti Aayog's dimensions. The only thing is that Niti Aayog has taken these dimensions from the United Nations. Okay, so health, education, standard of living, again those same 3 dimensions. उनके sub dimensions भी almost same है, nutrition, child mortality, years in schooling, school attendance, intensity of poverty and head count ratio. There is an additional dimension of head count ratio. Head count ratio का मतलब है कि गांव में या किसी शहर में कितने बच्चे हैं टोटल और उनमें से कितने बच्चे स्कूल जाते हैं, उसे कहते हैं head count ratio. And the standard of living, again the same criteria have been used: cooking fuel, sanitation, drinking water, electricity, housing, assets. और इंडिया ने एक और क्राइटेरिया इसमें डाल दिया बैंक अकाउंट्स का, क्योंकि जनधन योजना जो खाता खुलवाने की योजना शुरू की गई थी उसके आधार पे, बट वो क्राइटेरिया वर्ल्ड बैंक में नहीं है, सो इट्स ऑलमोस्ट द सेम. There are minor differences. The Global Multidimensional Poverty Index was developed in 2010. It was developed by the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, OPHI, in collaboration with the UNDP, the United Nations Development Program. This index also uses health, education, and standard of living as the indicators for measuring the incidence and intensity of poverty. Now, since the words incidence and intensity have been used by your examiner, you also need to use these keywords in your answer. Okay? So, like before, we see that each dimension, health, education, and standard of living, is equal weightage, and each indicator within each dimension is further given equal weightage. If in this the household deprivation score is below a certain threshold, example 1/3, then the household is said to be multidimensionally poor or simply poor. So, Niti Aayog has actually derived its multidimensional poverty index from this global index. With this, we conclude our first lecture. I hope you've understood all the topics clearly. In case you've not understood something, you can revisit the lecture and listen to it again. You can also post your comments in the comment box, and I will be able to cover those topics which you've not understood in my future lectures. For more such informative and educational videos, don't forget to like and subscribe my channel. Thank you so much.